1, c is 5. So we get 9 minus 20, which then gives us negative 11. So we got a negative number. So there are two imaginary solutions. Two imaginary solutions. All right, let's try this one. So now, and if it helps, once it's in standard form, the coefficients of these values and the constant is your A, B, and C term, respectively. So we've got B is 1, so 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times C is negative 2. And then, folks, I like to do a little chop slash here. So when I simplify this part, the 1 squared, I get 1. I see to this I'm adding a negative. There are two negatives in this multiplication, so I'm going to get a positive, in this case 24. So I get 25, which is a positive number. So that means I have two real solutions. Last but not least, we would do negative 12 quantity squared minus 4 times 9. So we get 144 minus, or plus a negative, I'll just do that to be consistent, plus a, let's see, negative 4 times 9 is negative 144. So we get a 0, which means there are no solutions. Sorry, just kidding. If we get a 0, it's one real solution. One real solution. And to get that solution, obviously, we'd still have to do the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of this value divided by 2a. So there is one real answer there. Use the quadratic formula to solve the following. So now we have to do the whole shebang, the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we have a positive 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared plus a negative 4 times 1 times negative 20 all over 2 times 1. So the first thing we do, folks, is crunch all of this out. And so this is a positive 1. This becomes a positive 80. So I get the square root of 81. So 1 plus or minus the square root of 81 divided by 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. Now this, the next thing you do is the actual square root. So the square root of 81 is 9. So 1 plus or minus 9 divided by 2. So here's how we get our two real solutions. Since my discriminant was a positive number, it was 81, I know I get two real solutions. Well, this says 1 plus or minus 9 divided by 2. So do 1 plus 9 divided by 2. Your other answer is 1 minus 9 divided by 2. So we get 10 over 2, which is 5. That's one solution. And we get negative 8 over 2, which is negative 4. That is the other solution. Number 5, before we start that out, we are going to set this equal to 0 by subtracting 2x squared and by adding 3. That undoes these things. Make sure on the left side you combine it with the like terms. So we get negative 1x squared minus 3x plus 7 equals 0. Alright, now we can start doing the quadratic formula. So the opposite of b, let's use a thin pen. Opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. All over 2 times a, so 2 times negative 1. So remember, just inside the square root, figure out what that is. So that's going to be negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, this is 9, and that's 28. So that's 37 divided by -2. Did you guys catch my goof? Or how we do the opposite of b? I think I was maybe looking at that red +3 or something. I don't know. I wasn't looking right there. The opposite of b is at the start, folks. I'm going right here. The opposite of that is a +3. So there shouldn't be a negative there. Sorry about that. Let's keep rolling. Well, so from here, folks, on our last example, we were able to simplify and take the square root of 81. Square root of 37, you can't simplify anymore. So this is actually going to be our final answer. If you can simplify that radical, do it. Since I can't, that's where I'm at. Number 6, opposite of b. Notice it's already set equal to 0. So let's do the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. Which 2 times a? Man, that's going to be 2 times 10. It's going to be a big denominator. So we get -2 plus or minus the square root of, this is 4, this is, I think, 200. Yeah, so is that 204? Crazy. And then underneath, we've got a 10. Alrighty, so now we talked about if we can simplify what's inside the square root, do it. Well, I know 4 goes into 200, so I know 4 goes into 204 because it's just one more 4. So to simplify that radical, I'm thinking to myself, the square root of 204 is at least divisible by 4. Maybe there's another bigger perfect square, but I'm not sure about that. And 4 times 51 is 204. So this simplifies to 2 square roots of 51. So I'm going to rewrite that now. So -2 plus or minus the square root, oops, just kidding, plus or minus 2 roots of 51. That work in blue is how I took the highlighted square root of 204 to this, divided by 10. What was I doing? Divided by 2 times 10, which is 20. So now, folks, you could, to make this look better, I think to make us understand the math better, we should do this. So we have -2 plus 2 times the square root of 51 over 20, and -2 minus 2 square roots of 51 divided by 20. So since both of these terms are getting divided by 20, and both of these terms right here, in fact all 3 of these terms are divisible by 2, it's essentially like I can factor 2 out of all of these. And if I do that, I get -1 plus or minus the square root of 51 over 10. And on the bottom I can factor out a 2 out of all 3 terms. Remember, things that are getting added or subtracted are separate terms. Once it's simplified as far as it can, I can't actually subtract the yellow and the blue. They have different powers, different degrees. But anyway, all 3 of these things are divisible by 2. So I'm going to like factor a 2 out, basically. So I get -1 minus 2 roots of 51 over, oops, I forgot to divide that by 2. So I just get minus the square root of 51 because that 2 gets factored out. And there we are. Now, they're going to actually, so you might, if you were taking some sort of a multiple choice test, they would actually kind of put this back together, because notice these 2 answers are really the same except for the plus and the minus. So the final pretty answer is going to be -1 plus or minus the square root of 51 over 10. Why I pulled those, so people are probably saying, well, why did you even pull it apart then? A lot of people don't see that they can factor out the 2. I don't know. Maybe you you could have seen it just as easy from there. So might have been a waste of time. You could have skipped from there, woo, to there. But it was fun. Number 7, let's solve for 0 before we try to start doing the quadratic formula. Mr. P is going to write it out really pretty, so hopefully he can identify A, B, and C correctly. So we've got A is -8, B is 7, C became a +2 because we undid the -2. So we've got the opposite of B, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C. Ooh, that looks kind of messy. That's a +2. All divided by 2 times A. That's also messy. So that's 2 times 7. So we get -7 plus or minus the square root of, let's figure this out, 49. I'm just doing some number crunching off to the side, but you can just punch this right into your calculator. 49 minus 64. Ooh, that'd be a +64. Which is going to be, I think, 113. That doesn't feel right. Yeah, it is 113. All over 14. Mr. P. It's early morning, by the way, but this is a little embarrassing. 2 times A, right? 2 times -8. Ugh. All right. And 2 times -8 is -16. You know, honestly, folks, it really should just have, you hopefully have your notes out with the formula right there. I think I sang it, but I think sometimes I say things and write something different. Anywho, enough of that. So the next step, once you identify what's underneath the square root, the b squared minus 4ac, you would try to simplify that radical, and you can't. So this is your final answer. Boom. I feel like I skipped number 7. Let's look at what that is real quick. Number 7 says 4x squared plus 3x equals 0. So in this case, folks, I'm just going to write it out here. I learned my lesson. A equals 4, B equals 3. And if you're like, man, there's no constant over here, that's right. That's the same as saying there's a 0 over there. So here we go. So we have the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. I think if I say it like that very clearly, my mind and body, I will do it. So let's simplify this. The funny thing about this is -4 times 4 is -16, but then anything times 0 is 0. So this stuff right here is essentially wiped out. So all I have is the square root of b squared. So the square root of 9, which goes back to 3 in a second here. So we get -3 plus or minus 3 over 8. So now we can simplify this even more. So we'll actually add the -3 and 3 and divide it by 8, and we'll subtract the 3 from the -3 and divide by 8. So we get 0 over 8, which equals 0, and we get -6 over 8, which equals -3/4. And there, I think we have all of them done. Did I skip any? I don't think so. And sometimes they put those answers in fancy pants brackets. And then these are your x values, folks. These are the x values where y equals 0.